When I was younger, I could never understand how my grandmother watched soap operas every single day. To me, every episode looked exactly the same. Someone would enter a room looking worried. Another person would slowly turn around. Dramatic music would start. Two people who were obviously in love would spend half an hour refusing to say it. And then the episode would end just before anything important happened. The following day, my grandmother would be back in the same chair, completely invested. She remembered every betrayal, every secret child, every suspicious marriage, every woman who had returned after being presumed dead, and somehow a single look between two characters could make her react as if she had just witnessed the most important event in television history. At the time, I simply did not understand the appeal, and I assumed those stories were not for me. Then I watched The Apothecary Diaries. At first, I genuinely believed I was watching it for the mysteries. That was the respectable explanation anyway. Maomao was an apothecary who had been kidnapped and sold into service at the imperial palace. She understood medicine, poison, herbs, disease, and the small physical details that everyone else ignored. When strange illnesses began affecting the emperor's children, she quietly worked out the cause, tried to leave an anonymous warning, and accidentally attracted the attention of Jinshi, one of the most beautiful and suspiciously perfect men in the entire palace. It was a strong premise, filled with medical mysteries, political schemes, hidden identities, dangerous traditions, and a protagonist who solved problems because she was curious, observant, and just reckless enough to test poison on herself. I had plenty of reasons to keep watching, and yet, somewhere along the way, the mystery stopped being the only reason I pressed play. I started waiting for Jinshi to appear, and more specifically, I started waiting for him to appear near Maomao. I paid attention to how close they were standing, how long they looked at each other, and whether Maomao seemed even slightly less annoyed by him than usual. Before I knew it, I was watching the series in the same patient, emotionally invested way my grandmother once had. I was no longer simply watching two fictional characters have a conversation. I was collecting romantic evidence. A glance that lasted 1 second longer than normal was evidence. A moment of jealousy was evidence. Maomao showing concern and immediately pretending she did not care was evidence. Jinshi finding another ridiculous excuse to keep her nearby was definitely evidence. The progress was painfully slow, and somehow that made every tiny moment feel enormous. That was when I finally understood my grandmother. The point was never that nothing was happening. The point was that almost nothing was happening, and that almost was enough to keep you waiting for tomorrow. The Apothecary Diaries is funny because, from the outside, it does resemble the kind of story I would once have dismissed as a palace soap opera. There's a beautiful man with a mysterious past. There are powerful families, secret bloodlines, imperial concubines, jealous rivals, forbidden relationships, hidden pregnancies, attempted poisonings, and enough court gossip to keep an entire neighborhood busy. People smile politely while quietly trying to destroy one another. A harmless gift can be a threat. A rumor can change someone's future. A romantic interest is never allowed to simply say what he feels because his identity, position, obligations, and political value make everything unnecessarily complicated. This is absolutely soap opera territory. The difference is that The Apothecary Diaries understands exactly how to make that kind of drama feel intelligent instead of empty. It gives us Maomao. Maomao may be one of the best protagonists for this story because she does not behave like someone who knows she is inside a romance. She does not arrive at the palace dreaming of status, luxury, or love. She wants to survive her time as a servant, avoid attention, and return to the pleasure district where she was raised. When she sees something unusual, however, she cannot leave it alone. A strange rash, a suspicious smell, an unexplained death, a badly prepared medicine, or the possibility of testing a new poison can immediately destroy every sensible plan she had. Her curiosity is stronger than her instinct for self-preservation. That makes her entertaining before Jinshi even enters the picture. She is capable without feeling unrealistically perfect. She knows a great deal about medicine, but she does not know everything. She can read physical symptoms more easily than emotional ones. She understands poison better than affection. She notices details that powerful officials miss. Yet she can remain completely blind to the most obvious romantic tension in the room. And that blindness is not simply a joke. It makes sense for her. Maomao grew up in a place where affection, beauty, money, and survival were often connected in uncomfortable ways. She learned to be practical. She learned that being noticed by the wrong person could be dangerous. She learned that powerful men do not always bring good things into a woman's life. So when Jinshi focuses on her, she does not react like the other women around him. She does not see a dream. She sees a complication. For Jinshi, that is probably the first interesting thing that has happened to him in years. He is used to people being overwhelmed by his appearance. He knows exactly what his face does to a room. He can smile, soften his voice, and make experienced palace workers forget how to behave. Then he tries the same thing on Maomao, and she looks at him as if she has discovered an especially irritating insect. That dynamic is immediately funny, but it also gives the romance somewhere to go. Jinshi cannot simply rely on being beautiful. Maomao cannot simply be swept away. He has to become a real person to her, and she has to slowly recognize that the beautiful nuisance following her around is not just another palace official playing with someone beneath him. That takes time. A great deal of time. In fact, and somehow, I loved every minute of it. I usually think of slow romance as something that can become frustrating very easily. Sometimes writers keep two characters apart because the story would end the moment they had one honest conversation. A misunderstanding happens. Someone walks into the room at the worst possible second. A message is never delivered. One character assumes something ridiculous and refuses to ask a simple question for 20 episodes. That kind of delay feels artificial. Maomao and Jinshi are different because their distance is built into who they are. Maomao is suspicious of power, uncomfortable with attention, and determined not to imagine a future that would drag her deeper into palace life. Jinshi is surrounded by secrets. Even his public identity is part performance and part protection. His feelings are not separate from politics, because nothing about his life is separate from politics. He cannot simply become an ordinary man and ask an ordinary woman on an ordinary date. She cannot simply accept his attention without considering what it could cost her. Even when they are emotionally close, the world around them keeps reminding us that they are not equals in status. That makes every step forward feel dangerous. It also makes the comedy better. Jinshi can be intelligent, observant, politically useful, and surprisingly vulnerable. But Maomao has a unique ability to reduce him to a frustrated man begging for the smallest amount of attention. He tries to create a moment. She starts thinking about medicine. He becomes jealous. She wonders whether he is ill. He moves closer. She looks for the fastest available exit. And because Jinshi is so accustomed to being desired, watching him work this hard for one reluctant reaction is deeply satisfying. I did not expect to care. That is the part that caught me off guard. The Apothecary Diaries never sat me down and announced that I was now watching a love story. It let the relationship develop in the background while I was busy following everything else. One episode might focus on poisoned cosmetics. Another might revolve around food, illness, a strange death, or a dangerous ritual. Maomao solves the immediate problem, but each case also teaches her something about the palace and the people inside it. The mysteries are not random puzzles placed between romantic scenes. They reveal how this world works. Beauty can be a weapon. Ignorance can kill. A tradition that looks elegant may have been built on cruelty. A woman's position can change because of one rumor, one pregnancy, one illness. A worn decision made by a man she may never even meet. The rear palace is beautiful, but it is not safe. The women inside it wear elaborate clothes and live in impressive buildings, yet many of them have very little control over their futures. Some compete for the emperor's attention because that is the only path to security available to them. Others form friendships, protect servants, hide pain, or learn how to survive within rules they did not create. Maomao understands that better than most. She does not romanticize the palace. She notices the perfume, silk, makeup, and ceremonies. But she also notices the poison, malnutrition, disease, fear, and desperation underneath them. That contrast gives the series weight. It is also one reason the romance works for me. Jinshi is not simply a handsome reward waiting at the end of Maomao's story. Getting closer to him would mean getting closer to the political machine she has spent so much time trying to avoid. His attention can protect her, but it can also make her visible. And visibility inside the palace is not always a gift. So when Maomao resists him, I do not feel like the story is delaying the obvious for no reason. I understand why she is careful. At the same time, I understand why Jinshi keeps returning. Maomao does something few people around him are willing or able to do. She treats him like a person when she is not treating him like a problem. She is not blinded by his beauty or impressed by his position. She speaks honestly, sometimes too honestly. She can solve the things that confuse him. She notices when something is wrong, even if she refuses to discuss what it might mean emotionally. Around Maomao, Jinshi cannot remain the flawless image everyone else sees. He becomes petty, jealous, dramatic, amused, worried, and occasionally ridiculous. In other words, he becomes human. That is where the relationship became more than a running joke for me. The comedy made me enjoy their scenes, but the vulnerability made me wait for them. There are moments when Jinshi's expression changes, and the performance disappears. There are moments when Maomao reacts before she has time to hide behind logic. Neither of them gives the audience a clean confession or an easy answer. Instead, the series gives us fragments, and I became embarrassingly good at surviving on fragments. A normal romance might give you a kiss. The Apothecary Diaries gives you Maomao failing to move away immediately, and you treat it like a historic event. A normal romance might give you a declaration of love. This story gives you Jinshi looking genuinely hurt by the way Maomao sees him, and suddenly, you are emotionally invested for another 10 episodes. At some point, I realized I was watching exactly the way my grandmother used to watch her soap operas. Not passively. Actively. I was arguing with the screen, I was anticipating interruptions. I was suspicious of every new character who stood too close to either of them. I was interpreting facial expressions like classified documents. When Jinshi and Maomao shared a moment, I did not simply accept it. I inspected it. Did she look away because she was uncomfortable? Or because she actually understood what was happening? Was he teasing her? Or was the joke protecting something more sincere? Did that count as progress? Surely that counted as progress. It had to count. This is what slow burn does to a person. It lowers your standards until eye contact becomes a season finale. And the strange thing is that I do not mean that as criticism. The waiting is part of the pleasure. When a romance moves quickly, the excitement comes from seeing the characters finally get together. When a romance moves like this, the excitement comes from watching them become people who might one day be capable of getting together. Every mystery changes their understanding of each other. Every dangerous situation reveals a new fear. Every joke becomes more personal because they now know exactly how to annoy one another. The relationship does not progress through a straight line of romantic milestones. It grows sideways. Through work, through trust, through irritation, through rescue, through moments they will both pretend were less important than they actually were. That is why the story can take its time without feeling empty. Even when the romance barely moves, the characters are still changing. And because the rest of the series is genuinely good, waiting never feels like the only thing we are doing. The palace mysteries would be worth watching without the romance. Maomao would be a great protagonist without Jinshi. The political story would still be interesting. The supporting characters have their own fears, ambitions, mistakes, and loyalties. The series can be funny one moment and unexpectedly painful the next. That balance is important because it prevents the romance from carrying more weight than it can handle. I did not have to watch 40 minutes of two people refusing to speak just to receive one meaningful glance. I watched a clever mystery, learned something new about the characters, saw another part of the palace's hidden structure, and then received the meaningful glance as a reward. That is an excellent system. It is probably how the show tricked me. Had someone described the Apothecary Diaries to me only as a very slow romance between a palace official and an apothecary who would rather experiment with poison than admit she has feelings, I might have assumed it was not for me. But the series did not ask me to arrive as a romance fan. It let me enter through another door. I came from Maomao, solving strange medical cases. I stayed because the palace was more dangerous and complicated than it first appeared. Then, quietly and without permission, I became invested in whether one emotionally unavailable poison enthusiast would ever recognize that the most beautiful man in the country was desperately trying to get her attention. That is why I do not think the Apothecary Diaries belongs to one kind of audience. The packaging may suggest a particular demographic to some people. There are elegant clothes, court drama, a beautiful male lead, and a romance that unfolds through emotion rather than action. But none of those things make it less universal. Competence is universal. Curiosity is universal. Political intrigue is universal. Wanting two stubborn people to stop ruining their own happiness is extremely universal. I also think men are sometimes trained to treat certain kinds of stories as if enjoying them requires an explanation. A man can watch two warriors spend 12 episodes trying to defeat each other and call it peak storytelling. But if he watches two people spend 12 episodes almost admitting that they care, suddenly He feels the need to defend himself. I am done defending myself. I wanted Jinshi and Maomao to make progress. I wanted the longing. I wanted the jealousy. I wanted the awkward moments that both of them would later pretend never happened. I wanted one of them to say something honest. And I knew perfectly well that the story would probably make me wait. The waiting did not make me feel less masculine. It made me entertained. And maybe that is the real thing my grandmother understood before I did. People do not watch these stories because they are fooled by the delay. They know the confession will be interrupted. They know the secret will remain hidden a little longer. They know the villain will return, the wedding will be threatened, and the truth will arrive at the least convenient moment possible. The predictability is not always a weakness. Sometimes it creates a ritual. You return because you want the next small movement. You want the satisfaction of seeing a suspicion confirmed. You want to complain that the characters are taking too long, while secretly hoping they continue taking just long enough to make the eventual payoff hurt. My grandmother was not waiting because she believed everything would be resolved tomorrow. She was waiting because it would not be. The story gave her something to anticipate. That anticipation became part of the day. The Apothecary Diaries gave me a smaller version of that feeling. I would finish an episode convinced that Maomao and Jinshi had finally crossed some invisible line. Then the next episode would begin. Maomao would return to thinking about poison, and Jinshi would once again be forced to compete with toxic mushrooms for her attention. I should have been frustrated. Instead, I smiled and kept watching, because by then, I understood the rules. The romance was not moving slowly because nothing mattered. It was moving slowly because everything mattered. His identity mattered. Her history mattered. Their status mattered. The palace mattered. The dangers surrounding them mattered. And most importantly, the people they were at the beginning were not yet ready for the relationship I wanted them to have. The waiting gave them room to become those people. It gave Jinshi time to become more than a beautiful face and a powerful title. It gave Maomao time to care without suddenly becoming a completely different character. She does not need to transform into a blushing romantic lead for the relationship to feel real. Her affection appears in her own language. Attention, concern, trust, the things she notices, the risks she takes, the moments when her actions say something her mind is not yet willing to admit. That feels more meaningful than forcing her into a conventional romance. It also makes the audience work. The series does not always tell us exactly what Maomao feels. We have to read her. We have to notice the space between what she says and what she does. We have to understand that indifference does not usually require this much effort. And yes, once you begin doing that, you are finished. You have entered soap opera territory. You are now the person explaining why a slight change in tone was actually a major emotional breakthrough. You are the person replaying a scene because one character's expression changed for half a second. You are the person insisting that the relationship absolutely progressed, even though anyone walking past the television would swear that nothing happened. Welcome. There is no escape. Looking back, I think the Apothecary Diaries surprised me because it challenged a childish assumption I never fully examined. I assumed that stories built around longing, palace drama, and slow romance were shallow simply because their pleasures were different from the ones I usually looked for. I understood the appeal of anticipation in action stories. I could wait episodes for a major fight. I could watch a character train for an entire arc before unlocking a new ability. I could accept a mystery withholding its answer until the final chapter. But when romance asked me to wait, I called it slow. that was not consistent. Anticipation works in every genre. The only difference is what we are waiting for. Sometimes it is a transformation. Sometimes it is a solution. Sometimes it is a battle. And sometimes it is Maomao finally looking at Jinshi and understanding what everyone else figured out a long time ago. The Apothecary Diaries did not turn me into a different kind of viewer. It showed me that I had always enjoyed this feeling. I just had not recognized it when the reward was emotional instead of explosive. So yes, I began the series interested in medicine, poison, and mystery. I admired Maomao because she was strange, intelligent, practical, and impossible to control. I liked the palace because every beautiful room seemed to hide something dangerous. I enjoyed Jinshi because watching the most desired man in the palace become completely powerless in front of one unimpressed apothecary never stopped being funny. But eventually, I had to be honest with myself. I was waiting for the love story, not because the mysteries stopped being interesting, not because the rest of the series became less important. I was waiting because the story had made every tiny moment between these two people feel earned. A look mattered because there had been distance before it. Concern mattered because both characters were so good at hiding it. Trust mattered because their world gave them every reason not to trust. The romance was not replacing the story. It was growing out of it, and that is why it worked on me. When I was a child, I thought my grandmother watched soap operas because she somehow failed to notice how slowly everything moved. Now, I think she noticed more than I did. She understood that a story does not need to reach the destination quickly when the waiting itself is entertaining. She understood that tension can live in a room where nobody raises their voice. She understood that one unfinished sentence can be more powerful than a complete confession. She understood the pleasure of believing that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the night when two impossible people finally stopped lying to themselves. The Apothecary Diaries made me understand that pleasure. It made me understand why the smallest romantic development could feel like a victory. It made me understand why someone would return episode after episode, fully aware that the story intended to keep them waiting. And for a while, it turned me into the person sitting too close to the screen, emotionally invested in a relationship moving at the speed of an elderly turtle. So, Grandma, I get it now.